behalf of the PICPA Government Relations team, I'd like to thank you all for attending today. And with that, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Jason Screenack, who's the state and local tax practice leader for RKL here in Harrisburg.
Good morning. Just want to personally thank the Department of Revenue for coming today, specifically John Kaschak, Deputy Secretary for Taxation, and Meggan Swisher, Director of the PIT Bureau. I think we're all kind of working towards the same goal, try to make Pennsylvania a better place to live and work, try to apply the tax system fairly and accurately to all taxpayers. There may not always be 100% agreement as to how we get there, but I'd truly like to thank the department for working with us as practitioners in resolving all the issues that we're coming up with. They've been really good to work with.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Peter. The department truly appreciates the opportunity to have this webinar today with the PICPA. Before we get started with the handful of slides that we have, I just wanted to upfront say that we do understand and acknowledge the frustration that's been caused, that Schedule Cs and UEs have caused, and to let you know that we have already started making changes. We've been working with the practitioner community since the summer to try to clarify notices and clarify the fact that we will accept summary level documentation as opposed to details. We have created filing tips for Schedule C. We had them since prior year with UE. We've also made some changes to the length of time that we're allowing for documentation to come into the department, and also for the length of time between first and second notices. And we're committed to making additional changes as well. I had spoken at a few PICPA events over the last few weeks and got some feedback from those folks. We're hoping to get some good feedback here as part of the webinar today, and take those things back and continue to make improvements for next tax season with respect to notice language, and also some other adjustments with respect to how we are selecting these returns for review. So with that being said, go ahead and get started. So a little bit of background as far as why we are looking at these two schedules. These are both an area where we feel that there can be a risk of noncompliance is probably the best way that I can say it. When we started looking at UE several years ago, we found that people were, taxpayers in particular, were confusing the fact that we don't follow federal rules for per diems and mileage reimbursements. Again, these two schedules are also places where we haven't traditionally spent a lot of time. We did have some rules built into the system before. Within the last few years, though, we had additional software available to us that allowed us to do improved analytics and score these returns for review. And so that's another reason why there's been a bit of an uptick. We did start looking at Schedule Cs for the prior tax year. We had tried to notify the practitioner community that that was coming. We only looked at refund-related Schedule Cs, got very little feedback for that. And so we moved forward this year with expanding this tax season Schedule C reviews and UE reviews to equal refund returns and balance dues. And sort of the final reason that we're looking at these schedules is we have a statutory mandate to make sure that all taxpayers are compliant with Pennsylvania reporting requirements and sort of to level that playing field. As we move forward, I'm going to turn things over to Meggan Swisher to kind of cover a little bit about the details in terms of quantity and actually the process behind what we review.
Okay, just to take a look a little bit at the numbers, the department receives over 6 million personal income tax returns annually, and 90% of the returns that we receive are processes filed, meaning they go through and they don't get looked at by an individual examiner. Approximately 10% of the total returns filed do get a review by a tax examiner, and about 25% of those returns then notices are issued. So the volume that is going, while it seems very large, is actually a small percentage of what we actually receive from taxpayers. We have suspended approximately 5% of the total Schedule UE returns that we were filed, meaning suspended, meaning we have tax examiners looking at them, and approximately 8% of the total returns we received that have a Schedule C attached to them have been looked at for review. So this is actually, again, as I mentioned, a small percentage of the total returns received. We received about 500,000, a little over 500,000 tax returns with a Schedule C attached to it, of which we reviewed about approximately 40,000 of those returns. As far as how we're selecting the returns to be reviewed, the department is using data analytical tools to determine standard expense amounts for particular industries based on the NAICS codes that are reported on the Schedule C. We're using all Schedule Cs that are filed with the department to come up with a standard amount that should be claimed for specific lines of expenses. Any returns that are reviewed are returns where the expenses being reported are above and beyond the average amount that we've compiled based on our data.
So one of the lessons learned, or lessons that we tried to learn from Schedule UE was notification, and trying to make sure that we did let the practitioner community in particular know that this was coming. As I mentioned earlier, we had a pilot review of Schedule C that was performed during the 2015 tax year. The way we tried to get this information out was via the tax update. On the Schedule UE filing tips, there was a blurb, sort of a bonus tip on the UE filing tip that mentioned the fact that we were expanding the Schedule C. And then most of that 2015, 2016, I guess it was the 2016 fall tax seminars covered this topic as well. I think the department does a dozen or so fall tax seminars, so that was the primary way that we got this communication out, in addition to the tax update and the notice on the UE. So the question that we've probably gotten most often, and what we're really trying to clarify, is does the department really want individual invoices? So we recognize this was a huge burden and not necessarily what we had intended. So we will accept summary level data. This is information we've been trying to get out again since the summer, talking to the practitioner community and the PICPA at events, at quarterly meetings with the PICPA. We will accept general ledgers. We will accept logs, bank statements, credit card statements. Just to kind of back up a half a step, I mean, we truly do believe that all of the information that we have asked for is information that should have been available to you as practitioners when you are preparing the return. While we will accept the summary level data, we do always reserve the right to request additional information. Some of the things that have come back to us at a summary level have been too vague for us to truly make a determination. So we do reserve that right to go back and ask for details about specific pieces. And our hope and our intention is, as we come into next tax season, as we come into the 2018 tax season, to clarify notices regarding what we'll expect. We will both be re-looking at the tips for successfully filing a Schedule C and the notices themselves to further clarify what level of documentation we'll accept. So this is another frequently asked question, I guess, is why is it taking the department so long to review my information? Also coupled with, why am I getting a notice that says you didn't receive my information? And the reason is quite honestly, it goes back to the level of detail, and it also goes back to the fact that when we ran data models against 2015 data to try to determine how many Schedule Cs we would that would be stopped or suspended for review by the tax examiners. That data modeling led us to think that we'd actually suspend fewer returns than we actually did when the actual returns came in the door. So this is sort of a two-pronged cause, is we ended up reviewing and writing out on more Schedule Cs and UEs than we had anticipated, in addition to the fact that when the granular level data started coming in, that took us longer to review. That taking us longer to review caused further backlogs, which I believe leads to the next slide, which is, yes, why does the department indicate that they did not receive my information when it has been submitted? And this sort of snowballed. I mean, this was something that was, something we could have better planned for. We started sending out second notices because it was taking us so long to get through the first sets of information. We've now made adjustments to that. We've now taken a step back and said it is taking us longer to get through the initial documentation. So new notices that started going out, I believe in September, started to indicate that we changed the system to say that instead of dunning a second notice after 60 days, we would start sending notices after 90 days, which is closer to the amount of time that it's actually taking us to get through the documentation. And again, just kind of wanted to circle back again to things that we've already done, which is putting together the filing tips, trying to get the word out that we will accept the summarized level of data as opposed to the detailed individual invoices. We did extend the period of time that we'll accept to receive so when we send up the notice asking for additional information. Originally we had asked for that information back in 15 days. We've now extended those notices, I believe, effective in September to be 30 days. As I just mentioned, we changed the timeline between first and second notices to be a 90-day lag. And as I mentioned earlier too, we continue to get the practitioner feedback, the PICPA feedback, and tweak sort of our rules for next year, our notices for next year. Trying to really address those lessons learned as a result of this filing season. So at this point, that is really what we had in terms of prepared slides. I know a big part of this, for those of you in attendance, is the ability for us to answer questions. So with that being said, I will turn things over to Jason, who I think has been jotting down some of the questions that you've been sending in, and then at the end, we'll provide some contact information as well.
All right. If you can just let them know that the slides will be available. We have a lot of questions with regards to the slides, so we will have the slides available for everyone. That will be pushed out and posted online. So I'm going to go through some of these questions shortly. What are some examples of summary level documentation that you would accept as opposed to the detail with regards to invoices, receipts, and such?
So a lot of that's going to depend on the type of expense we're questioning. Some of the requests that you're seeing are for a breakdown of other expenses that are being claimed. So for that, we would take the breakdown of other expenses as well as the amounts for each, not necessarily receipts for every other expense. Utilities is a big one. As opposed to getting every utility bill through the year, we would take one or two utility bills so that we could take a look to see, the amounts are correct and perhaps there's not any personal usage for those utilities included in the expense amounts. For receipts for travel, we'll take travel logs. We had mentioned for COGS that we'll take a copy of a ledger as opposed to the actual, again, receipts and invoices. So it's really dependent on the type of expense.
I would think for other expenses, either a breakdown or if they have a general ledger that covers what would be included in other expenses, we'd accept that.
We've taken credit card receipts as an example, a credit card statement, as long as it's clear that the credit card statement is just for the business, not included in personal, again, expenses in that credit card statement.
One thing that I think is kind of important is making sure that the taxpayers and practitioners understand that they're not getting that information back. I had some people tell me, I was like, yeah, I'm still waiting for my invoices to come back.
I mean, we have had people send originals. We do tend to send those back and remind them that we need the copies, not the originals.
Super. There are some questions with regards to communications. So if you're the taxpayer or practitioner supplying information to the department, can you kind of give them a hierarchy as the best way to get the information to the department?
We would prefer that the information come in via fax or via email. The issue with mailing the documentation is it can add up to 6 to 8 weeks before the information even gets posted to the system. So if you're emailing or faxing that information to our resource account, that will actually get posted relatively quickly. Whereas the mailing, unfortunately, there is that lag time by time for the mail, opening it, prepping it, and scanning it, getting attached to the count. The Schedule C tips that we have available for everybody to take a look at actually provides you with the fax number and the email address that can be used to submit documentation.
There's a question here about administrative costs compared to additional revenues. It's my understanding we're not quite sure what the revenues are going to be anyway. So
yes, we're continuing to evaluate what the actual revenue generation from the program is.
They're asking for the correct email address. I believe, is that in the slides?
It's in a link. If you click on the link there at the top.
Oh, okay.
Assuming.
We'll push that out.
Yeah, I think it's. I thought it was in the slides. Can I see this?
Yes.
I thought it was. Maybe it's on the slide.
And I will just add the tips for filing Schedule C are available on the department's website as well.
So the link should be on your screen now, or I'm sorry, the resource account for the email should be on your screen now, and the fax number as well. Thanks.
We did receive a question with regards to taxpayer submitted a PDF of some information requested, but they also included an Excel spreadsheet as well. They never got notice as to
So
they're actually assessed.
when you're emailing the information, we ask that it does come in as a PDF. That information is getting routed directly to our imaging system, so we do need it in a PDF format when it's coming via email. It's likely for that particular example that the PDF got reviewed, but the Excel spreadsheet probably did not get reviewed. I'm not sure what time frame it was submitted, so you should have some type of a notice. My guess is the notice that was received is what we received in PDF would be accepted, and what we didn't get to look at because it was in Excel would get denied those expenses. So you should get a notice, and again, you should always, regardless, get a notice one way or the other, whether we're adjusting the amount based on the fact that we didn't receive the documentation or that the documentation didn't agree with the expenses, or after we've reviewed the documentation and we do agree that the amount is correct, you will receive a notice in both cases.
Going forward, if the taxpayer thinks that they may have an outlier expense, should they be upfront and provide you the information with the filing of the original return, or would that create?
No, absolutely. We always encourage taxpayers and tax practitioners to send additional documentation along with filing of the return. We're not saying it's a requirement for them to send it, but again, as you mentioned, if they know they have an expense that might be large in comparison to other expenses in that same industry, they can absolutely attach it with the return. If you're filing electronically, which we absolutely encourage, you can send it as a PDF attachment along with that return.
I have a question here with regards to an email with a read request receipt, and they got notice that it was deleted.
So that just shouldn't be happening.
Well, so originally what happens is the email, when you send it, goes directly, that image goes directly to our resource account. It's not an individual opening the email and reading the email. It's going to an imaging queue. That read receipt was happening. However, we have since turned that off. So you won't get a read receipt now at all, because again, it's not an individual taking a look at it, it's being forwarded to our imaging.
So will they get anything back from the email account, at least saying that we received
Not
it?
at this
Nothing.
time.
Okay.
Question here is with regards to if information is being emailed, can they redact the Social Security and EIN information?
Yes, however, I would encourage you to include the tax return DLN on the information, and that DLN should be available on the notice that we mail to you.
Question with regards to best practices for original filings and additional information being supplied with regards to attachments. We're often told that the PDF attachments to our returns are not been received or were discarded.
I'm not aware of any PDF attachments actually being discarded. That should never happen. However, there are some issues when you send PDF attachments electronically. Certain software, there could be a formatting issue with the PDF. If you password protect anything or put any type of what's the word I'm thinking of? Besides, if you put encryption or thank you so much. If you password protect or encrypt that attachment, we will not be able to process it. So it has to be just a PDF attachment without any encryption or password protection.
So we're talking about data analytics and kind of reviewing the outliers. What's being analyzed? Is it all information that's being submitted with the returns internally with PA? Or are you looking at anything outside, kind of like the 1099Ks for the desk of sales and use tax desk audit?
No, all of this data was looked at with the return filings that we received with Schedule Cs. We're just using our own data to determine what averages are being claimed on the tax returns.
If the taxpayer provides you the sufficient information in which you agree with the expense being claimed, are they going to have to readdress this in future years?
they shouldn't have to readdress it in future years. The only thing that would impact that is if the expense amount increases dramatically. If they change the business type, that could bring the return back up for review. But as long as we've agreed with that expense line that we questioned, it shouldn't, and you submitted documentation, we should not question it again in the following years. Again, it's for that expense line that we questioned. So it's possible that it could get questioned another year for a different expense line.
That rule applies to both Schedule C and U.
Correct.
So if the taxpayer or practitioner views as the amount being questioned as kind of trivial with regards to the amount of tax dollars we talked about earlier, what are some reasons why they should still address this?
Absolutely. If we've questioned expenses on a Schedule C return and you do not submit the documentation, we will adjust the return, and then next year we will question it again, or we may just automatically adjust it because we've determined you cannot supply the documentation to verify the expenses that you claimed.
And even going forward, the sample size with regards to the outliers is going to be adjusted for those items which were not properly documented and for those that were properly documented. So going forward, we're going to have an issue as well. Is there any size of attachment that's going to be too large to be able to handle via email?
We ask for a limitation of 15 megs.
Okay. If it goes
Both
beyond
via
that,
email and fax. We don't actually have a solution electronically if it goes beyond 15 meg.
okay.
So you're unfortunately going to have to mail in that documentation. Again, now that we're accepting summary data, though, I don't know that there's a lot that should be that large anymore.
Yeah, I think that should be something that's pushed strongly among the practitioners. Try to start at the lowest level of information first, general ledger, and if you have to go beyond that, so be it.
Before you get off the email, Jason, so Megan, there was a question about if this resource account can be used for other things beyond Schedule C and UB.
Absolutely, yes. That resource account can be used for any request for additional documentation that the Bureau has asked for.
There's a question with regards to not replying to a second notice. The first notice and information sent in was not addressed yet. Is there a way that we can confirm information was actually received? It's about a 3-month process before you hear it.
Yes, I would. Again, it depends on when you submitted the documentation. If you submitted the documentation in, say, July, and you haven't gotten any additional notice other than that second notice, then I would resubmit it again, unfortunately.
The other thing that I'll say to you is I have my contact information at the end of the slide deck. If you're in that situation where it's been 3+ months, and you're just wanting to at least know if we have it before you resubmit it, you're welcome to reach out, and I can have her folks, look into it at least to see if we've received the documentation.
We would also encourage, if you'd like, to email the department through our tax practitioner online customer service center. If you want to send an email in there, they will respond whether or not we've received the documentation, and you usually get a response with them within 48 hours.
And that actually came up in several meetings over the past few weeks with the PICPA. That right now email system that has the option for a practitioner to write in is a secure email as well. We had some questions about practitioners not wanting to use personal emails to send taxpayer information that had PII. So what we can do is via Peter send the instructions out how to use that right now email system. It's a secure email system through our portal with an option for practitioners.
Question with regards to data collected in the current period be used to adjust future selection criteria. I think
Absolutely.
we answered that.
Yes.
What is the email for the tax practitioner to confirm receipt?
So that's. Did you want to?
No, so is it via right now?
Yeah, it's correct. It's not an actual email address.
No, but it's an email option, right?
Correct.
It's a secure email option.
If you go onto the department's website, right on the very first screen, there is a link that says email us your tax question. If you click on that link, it will take you through to our secure portal to log in. You'll have to register with a user ID and password to use it.
And those are the instructions that we'll send via Peter out to everybody who's participating in the webinar.
There has been some concerns with regards to faxing information in our recent meeting that they couldn't get the fax through and they couldn't get through on the phone. Has Has that kind of been resolved a little bit after the first rush of notices have been sent out?
So the short answer to that is up until about a week ago, we didn't know it was an issue. No one had been sort of letting us know that the fax was a problem getting that information in. So the best answer I could provide at the time is we do have folks looking into what would have caused the situation and what we can do about it.
There's a question here with regards to who authorized these audits, and did this come from legislatures? This really isn't an audit; it's a review of, and it did come from legislators.
Yeah, no, and so yes. So this is something that statutorily we actually have the obligation to do. If you look at that last paragraph on that slide, the department is required to make inquiries and determinations and assessments relative to the taxes imposed under Article 3, which is personal income tax. As Jason said, we don't consider these to be a true audit. I mean, it is a desk review. It's us, exercising our rights under the tax reform code to inquire and ask for additional information.
And this is not replacing the actual audits.
No.
You're still using the audit process for it.
Correct. The Bureau of Audits is still doing their normal process of identifying their auditees and doing their thing.
There's a question here that's pretty specific with regards to supplying information and then adjustment for something not requested. So I would say that that's something that should be addressed personally. I think this is a pretty easy one. You have the information before.
Correct.
The question
we didn't
was,
have the tools.
you were obligated to perform these reviews all along. Why are we just now seeing it? Before you don't have the information to do anything.
Better tools, right?
Why is the department disallowing all expenses based on the one requirement for supporting one type of expense?
And I will say that should not be happening. If that did happen on a case, that is an error on our part for the person who looked at the documentation. Again, I think that's things that we'll have to handle one-on-one with and then we'll provide the contact information.
Are QuickBook reports acceptable detail?
Yes.
Yes. The procedures for contesting the findings. So I think kind of go through. It's going to be a billing notice.
So if it's a refund denial, you'll receive a notice, what we call a taxpayer notice, and that is a notice that can be used to file an appeal with the Board of Appeals. If it is a adjustment that results in a balance due, the taxpayer will first receive a billing notice, and then that will track to an assessment. Once they receive the assessment notice, again, that is appealable with the Board of Appeals.
Question with regards to monetary benefit, that's not sure at this time. There's a question about why not have a secure portal for delivery.
It's certainly something that we're looking into. Right now, our secure portal would be the Right Now email system. You can include an attachment with those.
Sorry. There's another question with regard to summary information. I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis.
Yes, it is. And within the Schedule C documents, we do mention a few of the different summary data that we would accept. So I would encourage everyone to read the tips for successfully filing PA Schedule C.
And once again, we'll be updating that document going into this tax season, having gone through a year of looking at the documentation that was sent in. So we will try to be a little more specific where we can.
No.
Yeah.
The question is if we will publish the industry data that we are using to compare taxpayers' tax returns. We will not be sharing that data.
Make my life a lot
yeah, I
easier.
was just saying, just put a few dollars underneath.
That kind of goes back to you're not going to publish not knowing what expenses to.
Exactly.
So what happens if there is no reply from the taxpayer for a request?
We will adjust the amount of expenses that was reported on return. We will completely zero out that line. The question of whether or not this info gets reported to the IRS is being disallowed. Not readily is it shared because we have different rules than the IRS. However, the IRS may request data from us that we will have to supply. One of the things that we were also asked about is the sharing with the localities. When the localities request the data from the department, we will share with them the adjusted amount, not the amount that was reported on the tax return. So they will receive a lowered figure.
Question with regards to why you're asking for itemized breakdown of line 37 when the PA Schedule C already provides an itemized breakdown.
Typically, when we're asking for it, we don't receive, the line 37 does not include the itemized breakdown, or the itemized breakdown does not include the amount of each.
Question with regards to an expense item being reviewed and accepted, and would it be up for audit for future years? We kind of discussed that.
As long as it was accepted this year, and as long as the amounts are in line with what was claimed in a prior year for that expense, we should not review it the following year.
Specific question might be helpful though. It's cost of goods sold was requested interior designer, most of cost of goods sold are product and 1099 contractors. Is there a further breakdown that you might want to consider for something like this?
Yeah, I would probably include with the return the actual breakdown of those expenses.
Good question.
Yes.
Are there going to be notices between the time period January through April?
Notices will continue to be issued in the time frame from January through April. The department does work on returns first in, first out. So as soon as we start receiving returns in January, we do start reviewing them. Unfortunately, we can't hold the notices until later on in the year.
Does that same issue with regards to not if it's justified expense for the Schedule C, it won't be reviewed going forward? Is it the same for UE expense as well?
It is the same for UE expenses as well, again, with the caveat that everything else remains the same on the return the following year. The occupation is the same, the expense amount is the same, those types of details. We do reserve the right to look at it again if something changes.
And another item with regards to supplying the support documentation ahead of time with the submission of the return if you think there may be an issue.
Yes, you can absolutely provide that information ahead of time. Again, we're not requiring it, but that can certainly be your choice.
Can you repeat what happens with the PA adjustments for the local?
If a locality requests data from the department on state income tax filings, if we have adjusted the Schedule C amount based on us denying an expense, the locality does receive the adjusted amount. They don't receive the originally as filed.
I had a couple questions with regards to Schedule C showing a net loss. Why question expense when they get disallowed would still result in net loss? It's not going to be that way forever. It could change from year to year.
It can change from year to year, and again, it's really not only about generating revenue. It's about ensuring the taxpayers are claiming the correct amounts. It's also an education tool.
Question here: local EIT collectors get income information from the department for matching to local filings. Will adjustments from either UE or Schedule C exams be provided to the local collectors?
Yes. Yeah, that's
yes. Again, it will be the adjusted amount that gets provided to them.
There's a question with regards to how this kind of coincides with the desk review for sales and use tax audits. This is kind of separate because they're using 1099K information.
Right. So they are using external information in addition to internal information, and it's a separate it's a separate bureau kind of doing a discovery effort, sales tax desk audit effort with different data than we're using on the front end process.
Question with regards to why not proposing an adjustment before an assessment? Kind of are with regards to the billing notice.
Well, the billing notice and the request for
request,
additional,
yep.
so the request for additional documentation is our attempt in proposing an adjustment. So you can see what may get adjusted if we don't receive the documentation. As I had mentioned, when it's a denial of a refund, unfortunately, it just becomes a denial of a refund. If it is an increase in balance due, though, you will receive a billing notice. You can correspond with us during the billing notice time frame if you want to correspond back directly with us before the assessment is issued.
Question with regards, would it make sense to start mailing returns to the department rather than e-filing if the Schedule C is considerably different from prior?
And I don't
I
know
think
that
so.
I understand the question.
I think they're asking about the support documentation, if it's too much to kind of send through the e-file system.
Which is, again, I go back to, you can send the information with the e-file return. However, I wouldn't automatically assume you have to send the information with the e-file return. So if you're planning on sending every receipt as a PDF attachment, I would not do that. I would send the return with just the Schedule C.
And I'll just reiterate, mailing is going to add time. Same thing, it's come up, we've received questions about sending this information certified mail. That adds even additional time to the process. So, going back to Megan's earlier comments, I mean, all of the mail comes into the department centrally and is then it's then opened and sorted and scanned, and it takes, so this isn't just Schedule C information coming into the department. This is, information relative to all of the notices. This is people sending in coupons and payments and other returns, and all of that information is coming into the department, is being worked, opened, scanned, and getting into a queue. So mailing is really not the best option from a time perspective.
Question with regards to an unresolved 2016 expense. Will there be a notice for 2017?
Most likely there will be a notice for 2017. When you say unresolved, meaning you've sent the documentation, you haven't received a notice from us yet, that should not, anything that you've already submitted documentation will be completed before the 2017 tax returns are reviewed. But if there's an issue again with something that we did not receive the documentation, you will likely receive another notice in 17 for that same issue.
Another question with regards to line 737. If a detailed schedule was provided and they're asking for additional information, should they provide more detail as to what was provided on that schedule?
As long as it had the expense type and the amount, you can provide that again. I'm just curious as to, we shouldn't be questioning something that's already there. So, it'd be good to verify that we actually did receive all the expense lines. I know I've received some feedback from tax practitioners where the copy of the return has the details, but our copy doesn't. Particularly if there's a statement schedule attached to the PA return, we sometimes don't receive those electronically. So I would just verify that it was actually our copy of the return has the amounts and the breakdown.
So after the two written requests for information, if it goes to a billing notice, can the taxpayer or practitioner respond to that billing notice to try to resolve an issue?
Yes, absolutely. I would just be careful if an assessment notice does get issued and you're trying to correspond with the department, that you then use your appeal rights.
Question with regards to UE, would it be appropriate to attach receipts to an e-file return? The expenses are rather high. Would this reduce potential notices down the road?
It may reduce potential notices when we take a look at the receipts and the type of expense. That's not to say we may not deny it because we don't consider it to be an allowable expense. So you could still receive notices from us, but it certainly would reduce notices going out requesting that documentation.
That just brings something to mind, though. So if, and I think maybe where Megan was possibly going with this is sometimes we don't know if it is required or reimbursed. So one of the other things that probably would be helpful to attach would be that support for Schedule UE. So we have the affidavit online that says that they are required to incur these costs and are unreimbursed for those. So sending that information along with the receipts would be helpful as well.
Question with regards to if they receive a billing notice or an actual assessment of tax, will there be detail enough on that to figure out which line items or which expenses were denied?
No. What you will see is on the notice we'll have the lowered amount or the different amount on line 4 compared to the tax return. And again, it should correlate with what we questioned. So meaning if we questioned a utility expense, that's the amount that should have been denied.
Is there any option or possibility to request a fax-back confirmation if information is faxed to you?
No. Again, the only fax back confirmation you'll receive is from your own actual fax machine. Unfortunately, yes, if you have documentation that you submitted in June, you should have received follow-up from the department by now. So I would either encourage you to go back and follow up to see the status of those notices.
So you about a 3-month time frame?
Yes, we're currently reviewing
submission.
August correspondence.
And you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are addressing each submission, whether you're accepting it or denying.
That is correct. You should have a follow-up notice from us.
Sorry about any audio technical difficulties. I'm not sure which questions didn't go through.
Right.
There's no correlation.
I would suggest, so for any of the very specific questions that are being sent in, I would suggest that you either send an email to the contact information I provide at the end of this, or as Megan mentioned earlier, going through our portal, saying, through the contact the department link and sending in those specific questions that way.
There's a question about for PAUE, for union workers, do you need to get a letter from the employer to support the UE deductions? If they are working out of a union hall and it's clear that they're working out of a union hall, we shouldn't need a letter from their employer to verify those expenses.
If the taxpayer decides not to send a information with regards to a notice, when can they expect to receive an assessment?
I actually don't have a great time frame to give as to when we'll get to actually the adjustments of those returns.
If they wanted to expedite the assessment process, could they contact you and say, we're not going to submit the information, don't even bother with the second?
Absolutely. If taxpayers have determined that they are not going to provide support for the expense that we're questioning, they can let the department know that and we will disallow the expense and adjust the return.
Question with regards to treating someone that sends in the source documents, the receipts, as opposed to sending in more of a summary level. I think you should, like I keep saying, you should start at the summary level, and if you have questions with regard to the summary level, then they'll get into the detail.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, kind of going through. There's been a bunch of questions trying to find some. Any way that you can kind of know which ones are?
Unfortunately, not at this time. The question was if we questioned 2 or 3 different lines and allowed some portions of and not others, how can we know from a billing notice what is being allowed and disallowed? And unfortunately, the only way you're going to be able to tell is by looking at the amount of line 4 that we lowered it to, and going back to which part of the Schedule C expense that difference correlates to. And the question about why doesn't the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue send a receipt of information notice similar to the IRS? We've actually been asked this question quite a bit. With our current technology, we do not have that ability to send a receipt of information notice. However, it's something we will certainly consider in the future.
Question, I think we went over this briefly, but there's a question with regards to time and expense that we have to put into this to resolve small tax dollars. They want to know, will this affect future years as well? And the answer is yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
And it's going to impact what selection criteria you're using for future years. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
The question is, what is the procedure if a taxpayer declines to provide documents to support deduction? Must a PA 40X be filed? Absolutely. If they're going to now increase the amount of expense or not take the expense, change the amount that's being reported on the original return for line 4, I would encourage them to file an amended return. Again, as we mentioned, though, if they want to contact the department and let us know that they don't plan on claiming that expense anymore, we will make the adjustment.
Is a handwritten summary of expenses acceptable as opposed to QuickBook?
Handwritten summary is acceptable. Again, we do reserve the right to have to request additional information when we review that summary.
Question with regards to requesting support for UE expenses when they're reporting a line item is 0. I've never run into that. I'm not sure.
And again, if you see a notice where we're questioning something that's not reported on the return, that is an error made by the department, and I would encourage you to respond to the notice as such.
Are you saying that you first want a summary and then ask for additional documentation, or do you want documentation summary level with some sample detail?
We will first accept the summary, and then we will ask for additional documentation. Again, what I mentioned about the utility expenses, we wouldn't, if you don't want to send a full year of utility bills, we will accept a sample utility bill just so we have an idea of what the monthly amounts are that then accounted for that full year return.
Do you see it as a possibility of possibly being able to identify which expenses are being denied going forward?
It's certainly something we can look into, yes.
Great. I think that'd be useful for everyone. Specific. Yeah. Are you taking into consideration different region in which taxpayers live or what industry that they're associated with in the selection criteria?
We are not taking into account region for the selection criteria, but we are taking into account industry.
If info was provided more than 90 days ago with no additional requests, can they assume that the notice was accepted?
No, they cannot assume it was accepted because they should always receive a follow-up notice from us, notifying them that we either denied the expense or that we are accepting it.
And it's kind of similar thing here.
Yeah.
Anything that's kind of past the 3 months.
Right. You should be reaching out to the department.
Yep. Back to the IRS, it's case by case.
And only, it's very specific circumstances when we're requested to provide the information.
I think this is a good question. How many additional employees has Pennsylvania hired for this initiative?
There were no additional employees hired for this specific initiative. The department does always hire temporary staffing during tax season to assist with the increase in filing of returns. However, this specific review, as well as the UE, we've been using permanent employees that are existing.
Seasoned employees.
Yes.
some concern with regarding security of information being sent. What is the most secure way to send the documentation to the Department of Revenue?
I mean, they can use right now to send secure.
Yeah,
It's not going to go directly
electronically.
into a queue.
I'm assuming no change notices have been sent out.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. What is the best and most effective route for a taxpayer to submit your request?
Two most effective route and best ways are email and fax. I understand that we're hearing feedback that the fax lines have been busy. If you're not able to get through to the fax line, I would encourage to send that documentation via email.
And I think up front when they file electronically to attach any PDFs.
Correct.
So when this first initiative started coming out, were you contacting taxpayers when there was no change, or is that something new?
No, we've always contacted taxpayers when there was no change. I think the issue is the lag time in between, where people were assuming we weren't going to be corresponding with them. And again, when we got to a 3 and 4 month time frame before they were here at correspondence, I think that's where the concern.
So at the height of the delay, you guys close to 6 months almost?
Yes.
And the other thing I'll add is the notices aren't incredibly clear. They basically look like any other notice with just no change on the tax line. On the tax line.
Yeah, because so there's one person saying that an agent for the department said that sending a notice for no change was at their discretion. That's not true.
No, that is not true.
A lot of questions about specifics when they're sending in information. I would say be safe if it's over 3 months. Reach out to the department.
Yes.
Anyway, the practitioner can be copied on these replies, notices to the taxpayer.
Unfortunately not. We do not have that capability to collect that data to be able to correspond directly with the practitioner. If you are filing the return electronically and you are a user of our tax practitioner portal, you can view notices that were issued to the taxpayer via that method.
If information should be sent fax or email, why aren't these displayed on the billing notice?
Right now, they're not displayed on the billing notice. However, we did change the notice where we're requesting additional information to provide the email address and fax number.
I'm concerned with regards to revenue agents providing different answers to these questions.
The Schedule C tips that we are issuing to tax practitioners and taxpayers are being issued to the employees as well. We can certainly make sure that that information is being disseminated.
And it has been disseminated to all of the call centers in addition to the Bureau of Individual Taxes. So we can certainly follow up if we know that misinformation is getting out there.
The question is if the 677 form, which is our power of attorney form, is submitted to the department, will correspondence be with the designated representative? No, it will always be with the taxpayer.
So the question on the power of attorney form, so the issue isn't that we won't communicate with the CPA if we have a power of attorney form. The issue is really a system issue where we have no mechanism in the individual tax system to generate a letter out to the practitioner.
From a practitioner standpoint, I think a word of the wise is reach out to the department if you're having an issue. They're more than willing to, help us through our concerns, try to resolve issues. Yep. I would suggest reaching out to the department. I know personally they're great to work with. They always kind of point me in the right direction. They may not agree with me. They may not agree with my taxpayer, but at least we know what we're trying to get to you and making sure that the information is what you're looking for.
And the last thing that I'll add, I mean, so you've heard us talk about, ways that, you can communicate with us to get information to us, faster and the types of information we'll accept. But the other thing I do want to reiterate is really the fact that, we do understand the concerns and the frustration of you and the taxpayers, and we really are taking all of this feedback and we've started to make some changes in terms of timing and clarification. The intent is really to take all of this feedback from conferences, from annual meetings, from quarterly meetings, from chapter meetings, and from events like this to really, hopefully make the process better for next tax season.
All right, just in closing, I'd like to, again, thank Meggan and John for being with us this morning and for answering questions. Again, if you have additional questions, feel free to submit them and we will get them to the department. We appreciate the department's willingness to do this webinar. Thanks, Jason Skrinak, for moderating the panel as well. And as he said, there are several hundred questions that are coming in. We tried to answer as many as we could, but there's also, a lot of the questions are repetitive. So I think we've answered most of the issues. I think if you have real specific issues, then feel free to reach out to the department. A couple of announcements real quickly. I think initially we stated that there is CPE. There is no CPE for this program. Again, there is no CPE for this program. So with that, again, thank you, Meggan, John, and Jason for joining us today. Have a good day, everyone.